Time for Matt. Okay, so yes, now we're gonna do Matt or Yamato Matt Ishida. He of course has the crest of friendship, which of course is his crest, and his partner Digimon is Gabumon. I unfortunately don't have one of these for every single one of the Digidestins, but for the ones that I have, I'll use. So I have Gabumon, and of course Gabumon digivolves from Sunamon. Sunamon. Who, the entire time that I've had this, I'm like, I really freaking hope that Sunamon is very careful with where his spike goes. So we're gonna put Sunamon over here. And of course, because, Gabumon, Matt deal with friendship, I have a bunch of Pokemon or a couple of Pokemon over here that have to have high friendship to evolve. So we've got Espeon and Riolu and Umbreon. So those are what we got. For that, Gabumon's line is, of course, Sunamon into Gabumon, into Garurumon, and then into Were-Garurumon, into Metal Garurumon, and then Metal Garurumon into Omnimon. He probably won't be making very many more appearances, unfortunately, because Ty and Matt are the two that make it. And of course, as you kind of found out from my previous video, the Ty video, if you watch that, Omnimon, of course, has his merciful mode, which I will be talking about in this one again. Okay, so at the beginning of the story, as I said, I'm going through this kind of based on, timeline-wise from the Digidestin's perspective. Matt and TK are brothers. Matt is about 4 years older than TK, and back in 1995 in the Digimon timeline, they watched from their bedroom balcony as Parrotmon and Big Agumon turning into Red Greymon battle, and they protect Ty and Kari. I do not think at this point in time that Ty and Matt know each other. We know that Ty and Sora know each other because they go to the same elementary school type thing. But I don't think that Matt knows any of the others. And they watch the event, and of course, as I mentioned with Ty and Kari, with Ty, they are also scanned by these, the Digi World protectors, to see if they would be worthy of being Digidestined, and we of course find out that they are, of course, obviously. And then sometime after the Parrotmon and Red Greymon event happens, their parents get divorced. Unfortunately, it's for an unknown reason. My best thought is that unfortunately it was just different careers, and just the parents grew apart, which happened to my parents. I know exactly where Matt's coming from with the parent divorce thing. In the case for Matt and TK, it was Matt went with their father and TK went with their mother. I'll go over them a little bit later. They're actually two of the fairly well involved parents in the Digidestined, because they're there throughout the first season, in the latter half of the first season, and then they're there kind of throughout the second season. So we get to see a fair amount of them. Them, along with Ty and Kari's mom, are very involved in the Digidestined for their children. A lot of the earlier Digidestined parents, like Izzy's parents, are fairly involved, and some of the other ones are too. Some of them aren't, although in Joe's case, it's his brother that's actually very well involved. But Matt goes with their father, and then TK stays with their mother. And then several years later, we have 1999 rolls around for the Digidestined. They're all at the the first 6 plus Matt, so the first 7 Digidestins are at the camp, and they get whooshed away to the digital world when it starts snowing, and they get their Digivices. And then Matt meets Sunamon when they get to the digital world, and Matt is very protective of TK throughout the entire time in the digital world, and even when they're back in the real world for the short time, he's very protective of his younger brother, mostly just because he looks at it upon himself to protect TK because their mom's not there and their dad's not there. Also, Matt unfortunately doesn't seem to have a very good relationship with his mother, and because it's just mostly because he hasn't really seen his mother. that much since, for the past 4 years, unfortunately, and I'll go over that a little bit later. But, he meets Sudomon, and then, they end up battling Kawagumon, just like in the Tai video. All the Digimon digivolve, and they digivolve into their rookie form, so that's where we get, Gabumon, and, so they do that, they fight Kawagumon, and then they fall into the river, and then they end up, with the weird phone booths, which are just funny. I may just undo something where it's like, what are the best lines in Digimon in regards to the best joke lines, but maybe not. I don't know. That's not really a big thing, but I just find a lot of the joke lines that they did in the background funny, just to mess with people, or like just to mess with the people that are listening to it. It's like, well, we had to have fun some way, but and Tai, of course, Tai and Agumon dealt with Shellmon, and then they end up at the train car that I mentioned in the previous video. They end up at the train car, and at the train car they kind of spend the night, and they are attacked by Seadramon, and Gabumon then digivolves into Garurumon in order to fight Seadramon. And, that's kind of where we get his first Digivolution, of course, up into the champion level. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the other Digidestined, they each get their Digimon to evolve, except for TK. And, they all have their own little bits that I'll go over with each of them. And then they kind of get, they deal with Devimon at the mansion, and then they are separated. And Matt and Gabumon end up in like a very snowy area for the part of File Island that they ended up on, because Devimon also like breaks up the island into all these different chunks, and so Matt ends up on one of those places. It's very snowy, and he unfortunately gets sick, and Gabumon takes him into this cave, and he's trying to keep Matt warm, and Gabumon builds a fire because Gabumon, like Agumon, can breathe fire, so he makes a fire. And I love this, that Gabumon's fur is removable, and he removes it at one point to put it on Matt so Matt doesn't get cold. And Matt's worried about TK and the others, of course, but they still, Gabumon keeps him safe for that night, and then they're found by Tai and Agumon and Frigimon. Unfortunately, Gabumon got a cold from not having his fur with him the night before, and of course he took his fur back right before Matt woke up, because I don't think we ever actually see Gabumon without his fur. It's just a running gag that we do, that they do in Digimon, and I find it funny. Frigimon finds herbs that'll make Gabumon better, so he's not sick. And then, of course, they fight Devimon, and of course, Matt has to watch as Anjumon, Patamon sacrifices himself in order to defeat Devimon, and he's very supportive of TK in regards to keeping the egg safe that Patamon hatches out of again. So he's very supportive there. And as I mentioned, Tai and Matt's friendship is very sometimes it's very solid, and then other times it's very rocky. Some of this is an impetus of TK, because Tai, of course, has been around Kari, his entire, her entire life. It's not like they were ever separated. He knows that, he knows how to deal with, younger kids. And TK and Kari are the same age. And Matt gets a little jealous of the way that Tai is able to, deal with TK, and, keep TK calm or make him laugh or deal with that. Matt is just a bit more overprotective of TK, because he just doesn't want to see his little brother get hurt. Tai is, of course, very protective of Kari, as I mentioned. But, Matt and TK, they also kind of have a little bit of a rocky, relationship as well. Matt still, of course, loves TK, and TK still loves Matt, but, it's a little bit of a rocky time whenever they're together, particularly in this type of a situation. I mean, in all honesty, if I was in this type of a situation, I would be like, okay, I really don't know what I'm doing, but I don't want my, I don't want my, nieces or nephew to get hurt, of course, so I want to keep them safe and keep them away from danger. So you can kind of see where Matt's coming from with that. But, they meet, Hologram of Jedi, and then, they make their way to Server, and they get their crests, and Matt, of course, gets the crest of friendship. And when they're running around on server, Matt's very critical of Tai at one point when Tai, of course, unfortunately, kind of corrupted Digivolves Greymon into Skull Greymon, but Matt still kind of forgives him. And then when Tai and Greymon, or Metal Greymon, are swept away in the wormhole after they defeat Datamon, um, they end up getting, all the Digidestin kind of get separated. And Matt and TK, of course, try to stay together because Matt wants to keep TK safe, and they find this amusement park, and Matt leaves TK there in the amusement park with Tokomon to keep to keep TK in kind of a safe place. And he goes off because he's going to go see if he can find the others, because they kind of fell apart without Tai, unfortunately. And he goes off with, him and Gabumon go off, and they find their way to this restaurant where Joe and Gomamon are. And Joe is unfortunately the Digimon that's in charge of the restaurant, Digitamamon, who is the egg-shaped Digimon. He pops up again later in Digimon Adventure 2.0, but for the most part, at the moment, he's kind of, not a nice Digimon. He kind of is working with Devimon, kind of being bribed by Devimon into, cause lots of trouble for Joe to keep him here. And then, when, Matt showed up, he's like, well, guilt Matt into having to stay by, threatening Joe a lot, to keep both of them there so they can't go and do anything. And it kind of messes with their friendship, of course. And what ends up happening is, at one point in the fight, unfortunately, there ends up being a fight that breaks out, and it's, Matt is trying to protect Joe, and he finds out that the Digitamamon has been causing all of these problems for Joe and for both of them, just to keep Joe around. And surprisingly enough, Matt can cook, which actually his father is a bachelor at this point in time, and Matt's at home a lot on his own in their apartment, so I guess it's not a big surprise that Matt knows how to cook. Never mind, nope, that's not surprising. That's not surprising at all. But what ends up happening is, this is when Matt's crest activates, because at one point he is trying to protect Joe from Digitamamon and I think it's the red Vegemon, or the Vegemon that's Tamamon's assistant. And Garurumon digivolves into Were-Garurumon for the first time. And he ends up using that fight, that's when he digivolves, and he that activates his crest, of course. And, Matt and TK show up Tai and TK show up at this point after their debacle with Devimon and the amnesia mushrooms. They show up there, and then, Matt and TK go off in one direction, and then Tai and Joe go off in another direction. Tai and Joe go off to go find Mimi, and then Matt and TK go off, and they actually end up encountering Izzy after his debacle, which, of course, I will talk about when I get to Izzy, which will be the next video after this one will be Sora, and then it'll be Izzy. But what ends up happening is, they travel, and then they're all reunited, and, they find Sora again, of course, and so all 7 of them are all reunited, and then they deal with Myotismon, of course. And Myotismon goes to the real world, and then they have to use the digital gate to, Jedi gives them, well, you have to use this way to get back to the real world, and then they get there. And what ends up happening is, they all get back to the real world, and, they all make their way back to their homes. And, this is kind of where we learn a little bit more about TK and Matt's kind of home lives. Matt makes sure that TK gets home safe, of course. And then he goes home, and his father, their father, I cannot remember his name at the exact moment, that's further down in my notes. His father is actually kind of the head, or the kind of the manager of a TV station. And I think it's in Odaiba, I think is where they live. So he's kind of the, the manager of this TV station. And there's lots of problems that keep going on, unfortunately, with this TV station. I feel so sorry for Matt's dad, for Matt and TK's dad. But, what ends up happening is at one point during the time when they're, home, TK and Matt go out onto the subway system at one point when Matt's trying to get TK home, I think. And TK and Patamon kind of have an argument. I don't remember 100% what the argument was about, but unfortunately they have an argument, and Patamon flies out of the subway and the others have to chase him. And then they end up dealing with two Digimon, Gatsumon and Pumpkinmon. And Gatomon is obviously the rockish type Pokemon. Yes, Gatomon would definitely be a rock type Pokemon. God. Digimon. I mean, like, Digimon have their own types as well. There's, like, data and virus and vaccine type Digimon, but that's a different story. That's not what I'm breaking this down into. No. But, they meet, Gatomon and Pumpkinmon. Gatomon is the rock type Digimon, and then Pumpkinmon is the one, of course, with the pumpkin and the axe in its head. And they came to the real world with Myotismon because they just kind of wanted to have fun there. They don't really want to hurt people. They just want to see what's in the real world. And so they're more there for, like, fun, as opposed to Myotismon and a bunch of the other Digimon that are there to cause a lot of problems and, find the 8th Digidestined, aka Kari, and kind of kill her. They end up kind of making friends with Gatomon and Pumpkinmon, and then Myotismon unfortunately shows up, and Matt and TK try to fight Myotismon, which unfortunately doesn't go very well. And Myotismon ends up killing Gatomon and Pumpkinmon. He imprisoned them, but he imprisons them and banishes them. He destroys them, and so that makes TK very sad, and it worries Matt as well. And and then they find out that later on, or like a couple of days later, or the next day or whatever, Matt's at home sleeping, and his dad shows up, and he's like, "Matt, wake up, wake up!" And he's like, "What are you?" He's like looking up at his dad. "What are you doing?" And his dad's like scarfing down food really, really fast, and he's like, "Wake up, grab Gabumon. You're coming with me. We have to go." And he's like, "How do you know about Gabumon?" And they leave the apartment, and it's the TV station was attacked by a bunch of Digimon, and there's this weird fog closing in around the city that Myotismon is using to, trap the city where it needs to be, so that way people can't get in and out of the city, so he can, find the 8th Digidestined, because he has Gatomon kidnapped at this point in time, and he's going to use her to find the 8th Digidestined, of course, because he now knows that Gatomon is the 8th Digidestined child. I don't remember if it's necessarily he knew this way back when or what, but I'm not 100% sure on that one. But Matt ends up finding Tai, and his dad kind of rushes him out of there and everything. And as I said, I feel slightly sorry for Matt's dad with everything that he has to go through. His TV station gets attacked a lot throughout the series, unfortunately. But he shows up, and Matt and Tai find each other. TK is on the other side of the fog with their mother at this point in time, and TK and Joe manage to find a way to get through, since Joe lives in that area as well. But they find a way to get through, so they're reunited with the others for the final battle. But Matt is left in charge of Kari while Tai goes to try to find Gatomon, and try to find them help and everything. So this is kind of when we have Matt and Kari have to be left alone, which Matt is still kind of awkward around any child that's not TK. So he's kind of awkward around Kari, which is kind of cute. But then, as I mentioned, like, Kari turns herself in to protect everybody else so they don't get hurt. And, this leads to, of course, Kari's taken to the TV station, and Myotismon is going to kill her, and Gatomon, and, all the other Digidestined arrive, and all of them have gotten, at this point, all of them have, of course, gotten to their ultimate levels. All of them have used their crest and everything, except for TK, because his doesn't activate until, like, the last episode of the series. season, because his is always like the last one to activate. Kind of a joke, I guess. But Tai and the others all show up, and Wizardmon sacrifices himself to protect Kari and Gabumon, of course, and then Gabumon digivolves into Anjumon, and she combines everybody's attacks to destroy Myotismon, and then of course Myotismon then stupid prophecy about angels of light and hope, and Tai and Matt have to fight Venom Myotismon as, where Greymon and Metal Garurumon, with their Digimon, and all the Digidestin work together to defeat, Venom Myotismon. And then they, of course, end up, the giant rifts opens up in the sky, and all of the Digidestin's parents, or their friend, or their family, kind of show up at this point in time. Tai and Kari's parents have showed up at this point in time, and Izzy's parents are there. I think Mimi's parents are there. Joe's brother is there, and then we have TK and Matt's parents are there. And this is the first time in the series where we actually see, where it's not in a flashback, where we see all four of them together. And TK is very happy about this because it's like all four of them in the same place at the same time. And this is the first time that Matt's kind of seen his mom in probably a while. And he's like very, very distant from his mom in this case. But he's like, Mom, Matt. I remember their mom's name is Nancy, but I cannot remember what their father's name is. But what ends up happening is, all of the kids have to go back to the digital world, of course. So they rainbow teleport up to the digital world where there's giant rifts in the sky and all their parents are watching. And at one point we get flashes back, or a few points we get flashes back to like what's going on Earth, because at this point in time the time is not synced up, so the kids are in the digital world a little bit longer than like their parents are watching. But at one point we do see their Tai and TK and Matt's parents actually are holding hands, like in support of their kids as they watch from below. And of course they go back to the digital world where they have to deal with all of the Dark Masters. And unfortunately, this is kind of one of the issues where Matt and Tai kind of come to a head on something, because Matt, we kind of see this with Matt, and then we also kind of see this with Sora. Matt and Sora both kind of have to deal with a bit of I would call it a bit of a depression type of a thing, because unfortunately Matt gets to the point where, because at one point TK gets kidnapped by Puppetmon, and he ends up having to, TK has to get away from Puppetmon on his own, which he manages to do. And Matt kind of takes this as meaning that, like, oh, TK doesn't really need me anymore, and Tai would probably be a better big brother to Matt or to TK than I would. And he ends up interacting with this Digimon named Cherrymon, who's just this giant tree Digimon, that is actually working kind of for/with Puppetmon. And Cherrymon kind of like tricks Matt into thinking that Tai is actually his enemy. And Gabumon digivolves into Metal Garurumon, which you would think in this case that would be resulting in a corrupted Digivolution, but it's not. It doesn't, which you'd think that it would, but it doesn't. So I just always get slightly confused by that. And, Matt and Tai unfortunately end up fighting. And this is like, during this fight is when like the whole like Kari gets possessed, and she, the being that possesses Kari explains, no, you're all picked for these different reasons, and your crests all represent something important about you. And Matt is kind of like, but mine's the crest of friendship, and he just didn't feel like he was being able to fulfill that part of what his crest was supposed to mean. And so Matt kind of goes off on his own. And then after the others fight Puppetmon again, he then shows up at the end, and he basically has Metal Garurumon roast Puppetmon, which is kind of a satisfying thing. And then Matt ends up on his own for a while with Gabumon. And as I mentioned, there ends up being a moment where because Matt and Sora each kind of have to go through something very similar to this. Very similar to what happens, but Matt and Gabumon end up in this cave system because Matt kind of goes off on his own, and he's kind of realizing Matt kind of falls into a pit of darkness, as it's explained. It's kind of like a cave of darkness. So in this case, first with realizing about like his parents' divorce, that broke his heart, that it made him very, very sad. It makes him very isolated, makes him very much into solitude and everything. And yeah, he cares about TK. He loves TK and he loves both of his parents, but he just kind of forced off that part of him to kind of keep him from being hurt anymore. My mother is watering flowers outside. Um, but, so to keep, he keeps himself kind of marked, cornered off from that, walled off from some stuff. So it makes it harder for him to get close to people. And that's kind of one of the barriers that Matt has to kind of break through in this case throughout this, this pit of darkness bit. And Gabumon's there, and Gabumon's trying to snap him out of it. And, Matt's eyes have just kind of gone blank, and there's, this big wall of, this big cave of darkness that's around them. And, he, is very sad because he doesn't want to be alone. He doesn't like being alone. He doesn't like being vulnerable. And like Gabumon's like hugging around him, and I love this bit because it's just like I've dealt with people that have dealt with depression, and part of that's kind of a good way I think of explaining depression to kids. It's like with Harry Potter, they have the Dementors. In this, they have that the digital world feeds on the people's emotions, on the kids' emotions, and it, Sora goes through the same thing, and I'll go that in her video next. But with Matt, it's it's the digital world makes this kind of dark cave because there is darkness in the digital world. That's where the Dark Masters come from, and that's where Devimon and Myotismon came from. But they have, it feeds off of that darkness, and it wants to bring it out in the kids, and not because it wants the kids to cause trouble, but it parts of the digital world, that darkness there wants to feed off of it. And there's, the Digimon, there's the Dark Ocean, which I'll go over a bit with Kari, and then again with Ken, and then the Dark Ocean is just kind of going to get its own, I think, might get its own video at some point, we'll see, but that'll be after I get through the characters. To set up basis for the Dark Ocean. But what ends up happening is, Gabumon helps Matt get through this depression, kind of get out of that, get past that block. And it's a good way of explaining depression to kids, as I said, because it's like, as you fall into this darkness, and that sometimes you may not be able to get out of it on your own, but if you have your friends and your family there, that can help. Doesn't mean that Matt's never going to have to deal with this darkness again. It just means that he needs to know that there's other people that he can rely on to help him if it gets that bad again. And, he runs into Joe when he gets out of this, and then Joe and him then run into Sora, and they help pull her out of her depression type of a thing. And then they show up, and then, then they go off to go and help, Tai fight Piedmon, because Pi and War Greymon have been fighting Piedmon, and they show up there, and Matt, via, the power of his Crest of Friendship, is able to help heal War Greymon, so him and Metal Garurumon can then fight against Piedmon. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, they all get turned into keychains, except for TK, Kari, and Anjumon, and then, what ends up happening is, Gabumon and Sora, or not Gabumon, Gomamon. There's a lot of G's. Gomamon and Sora were able to grab Matt's keychain and then get it to TK, and then kind of having that is what helps TK activate his crest, which then results in Magna Anjumon, which then results in, them being able to, revive all the Digidestined and their Digimon out of their keychain forms, which is good because now they can all fight the way they're supposed to. And then they then fight Piedmon, and they're able to defeat him. And then of course they have to deal with Apocalypse, and as I mentioned with Apocalypse, Apocalypse has his own issues. Very much his own issues, but he disintegrates the Digidestined and their crests, and he digivolves their Digimon, and disintegrates all of them, and then they have to their Digimon help them rally, and it's part of it is they have to remember that the power of the crest that they actually had, the physical crest, was helpful in regards to them being able to digivolve, and it kind of was a conduit, but that power was inside of them the entire time. as I mentioned with Matt, or as I mentioned with Ty, that power came from inside of them. It was there the entire time. The crest was just a way to kind of like a conduit to help them, you know, push it through or make it work better, give them something to help focus on. And so it's like Matt's friendship, his power of friendship, his crest of friendship. That power isn't just from himself, but it's from his friends all around him, to him, and him to them, and then to each other. Same thing with like Ty's courage is everybody's courage, and Sora's love, is everybody's love, and Kari's light is everybody's light, type of a thing. And so they deal with that, and they all digivolve again, and they're able to defeat Apocalypse, and then Apocalypse, he's gone, and then they have to deal with all of the, Jedi explains, well, you can't really stay much longer. You got about 2 hours, and then, the gate's going to be closed, and you can't come back. So I got a train car you can take back. Can you return it to LA? Or like LA or San Francisco or whatever, since that's where I got it from. I'm like, Jedi, will you stop stealing and hot wiring train cars? But we have, Matt and Gabumon having to say goodbye. And throughout the course of the season, we have had Matt has a harmonica that he always plays, and because he's very musically inclined. So he has this harmonica, and Gabumon's like, well, I wouldn't mind hearing you play your harmonica one last time. So, Matt starts playing his harmonica, and off in the distance, we have I think we have Ty and Argumon when they're saying goodbye. And Ty's like, Matt and his stupid harmonica. And then, and then of course we skip ahead a little bit to about 2000, the summer of 2000-ish, where we have, the battle with Diaboromon, of course. Matt and TK are currently off visiting their grandmother in the country at this time, and Matt and Ty and Izzy have to get a hold of them, which is just kind of a whole debacle in and of itself. And I work with phones all day at work, and I love the bit where it's like Matt, where Ty's trying to call Matt. They're calling every number, and the lady's like, I'm sorry, it's busy. Again, it's busy. Did you hear me? It's busy. I love that. That was just great. But, so Ty is trying to, of course, get a hold of Matt, but he can't get connected to Matt. And they end up, playing phone tag, and then they do end up getting through. And, then TK and Matt have to get to a computer that has access to the internet. They're in this barbershop with all these old people. And, they get that going, and then, they, Garurumon, or Metal Garurumon, and more Greymon unfortunately get kind of beat down by Diaboromon, and then they end up, Matt and Ty get sucked into the computer, and Matt and Ty, between their bond of friendship and their bond with their Digimon, that's when of course we get the Digivolution, and when we get Omnimon, and so we get that moment, and then, they're able to defeat Diaboromon, and, Matt and Ty go back to where they're supposed to be. And then, of course, that, there's, a summer in between, the summer of, I think it's, probably, the summer of, 2001 or so is when this happens, when Jedi calls, Matt and all the rest of the Digidestined back to the digital world, or it might have been, later in that same summer, and all the Digidestined have to give up the power of their crests in order to help create, a barrier, protective barrier around the digital world to protect it from more evil, to help fully rejuvenate the rest of the digital world, after what happened with the Dark Masters and with Piedmon, or with Apocalypse and everything, and even with Diaboromon. I would assume that probably had some effect on the digital world, but they do that. And then we cut to 2002, which is when we have Matt's in high school at this point in time. Of course, Ty's in high school as well. Or are they in middle school? I don't remember. I think it's middle school. I think they're supposed to be in middle school at this point in time. I don't remember exactly the ages for this, but I think they're supposed to be, there's either middle school or they're at the beginning of high school, one of the two. And things in Japan are a little bit different than what I'm used to here in the US, because the ages that they are would put them in middle school here, but then it would also put them in high school. So it kind of bothers me at times with the Japanese system of schools. So blah blah blah. They're older now, and Matt has his own rock band, and so he's singing and playing guitar in the rock band and everything. It's called the name of the rock band is the Teenage Wolves, Um, and Matt and Matt and his father still have a pretty good relationship. Matt and TK, of course, kept their relationship has been very very good over the years, and I think Matt and his mom's relationship I think has improved a bit. We still don't see the two of them around each other very much in this, but they do seem to have gotten a better relationship. I'm assuming like maybe Matt comes over every couple of weeks and has dinner with TK and their mom, and that like TK comes over and like has dinner with Matt and their dad, and maybe every so many months. I'm a little iffy on this one, but maybe every so many months they get together and have like a family dinner. But I'm not 100. I don't particularly think that that's true from something that we find out with TK later on. Um, but of course, Matt's got his band, and it's kind of based off of Gabumon's evolutions, or of course his looks like wolves, of course, but it's also kind of the movie I Was a Teenage Werewolf. So he's very popular, and one of his fans is actually Davis's sister, June, and she has a huge crush on Matt, and that's just kind of a running gag with that, unfortunately. And Davis at one point is just like, "I'm sorry, Matt, I can't do anything about her. I apologize." But when it's revealed that Matt or Ty can go back to the Digiworld, and then they start learning about the Digimon Emperor, and he's Ken and everything. Um, Matt and Matt goes, of course, to Digital World at one point. He's reunited with Gabumon at one point, and then of course I don't remember if that's in the same vein as when if that's exactly at the same point in time when Agumon ends up getting, kidnapped by the Digimon Emperor, and, has the dark ring and the dark spiral and everything when that whole incident happens. I don't remember exactly if that's the case or if he interacts with Gabumon one more time before then. But, it's a little bit, she deals with Matt does of course get reunited with Gabumon. And then he is, of course, there trying to help Tai when Agumon is, kidnapped by the Digimon Emperor and is enslaved and, is, forcefully digivolved into, with the Dark Spiral into the virus mode of Metal Greymon. And Matt's there, and between Matt and Tai, they kind of help with Davis's realization that results in him being able to get the power of the Digi friendship. And so that's where that comes from. So Matt still, it's, Davis is kind of the combination a little bit of like Matt and Tai because he has courage and he has friendship. And then Yoli is kind of like the Sora and the Mimi kind of combo. And then Cody is like Joe and Izzy combo. So we kind of get those a little bit. And then, TK, of course, still has his Crest of Hope, and Kari still has, of course, Light. Ken is kindness, but that unfortunately doesn't do too much in this case in regards to talking about Matt. But we do, of course, have the moment in the series where all of the Digidestined gather for the the anniversary of Myotismon's defeat, where Matt and TK kind of go wandering around, and they remember Gatsumon and Pumpkinmon, and then of course all the Digidestined go to the TV station. But what had happened before was, and they set this up, I think, in the previous, I don't remember if this is like just in the previous episode of when they do the anniversary or if it's in the same episode of the anniversary. But we have TK goes over to Matt and their dad's apartment, which is, I think, is the same apartment from like the first season. And like they're talking and everything, and Matt makes just something horrible out of everything in the fridge. It's just like TK's like, oh. Like it was like he was drinking so much milk or whatever, because it was just so spicy. And Matt's just like sitting there with this big grin on his face. Woo. And their dad comes home, and he explains, "Oh God," Matt's like, "You don't look so good," and the dad's like, "Oh, the station is haunted for all intents and purposes." He's like, "The station is haunted." Like, I didn't go through enough of this, 3-4 years ago or whatever, with whatever happened with my Otismon. My station got, kind of got destroyed, and now I gotta deal with this freaking ghost. And he, like, describes the ghost and everything, like, you're walking, and then it's there, but then it's not there, and it keeps popping up on different recordings in different places, never in the same place twice in a row, or that type of stuff. And he just can't figure out what's going on. But then TK and Matt go to bed, and their father, I love this is just a funny moment with their dad. It has nothing necessarily to do with Matt and TK, but it's funny with their dad. He starts eating some of the food that Matt made, and he's like, call the fire department. I'd be like, call poison control, considering a lot of what Matt made didn't look like it was necessarily edible or didn't sound like it was edible, even with Matt being a decent cook. So that was just funny. But the next day is they have the anniversary for Myotismon's defeat, and they go to the TV station, and this is where, of course, it's revealed that the ghost was Wizardmon. And I don't remember if their dad is if Matt and TK's dad is there to witness this or not, or if he's in the background. Of course, it was Wizardmon. Why hats? Why didn't I think of that? Because Wizardmon, of course, unfortunately, he sacrificed himself to protect Kari and Gabumon so many years ago, and he gives them this message that that they have to defeat Ken with kindness, which is of course a reference to Ken's crest, of course, and this is when the thing comes up of, okay, well, the rest of the kids, younger kids, are gonna have to go and stay in the digital world for a while until they are able to actually defeat Ken, and they may be gone for a while, so we need to come up with a cover story. And this is, of course, when Ty and Matt and Izzy all go camping with TK and Matt's dad. He's like, I need a vacation. Well, how about you come camping with us? Fine. So, he's the parent chauffeur, and June finds out about the camping trip via Davis because whatever reasons, and Davis doesn't really like the idea of his sister dating Matt, more just because Matt's his friend anyway. But he's like, you don't need to date him or whatever, and he lies about something, and then she finds out about the camping trip, and she tries to tag along, but Matt kind of lies to her, and then Davis and her and Davis's grandparents have to drive her to the campsite, but so Matt and Davis, or Matt and Ty and Izzy are covering for the others that are in the digital world, and then they wait and they find out that, okay, well, they did defeat the digital world, or they did defeat Ken, and he's he was released from whatever it was that was kind of making him do this type of a thing. Ken's gonna have an interesting video when I get to him. But so they come back, and June had showed up right before the others had gotten there, and she's like, well, where's Davis? And I'm like, Matt's like, they're hiking right now. Them and the others are hiking right now. Yes, all 5 of them are off hiking. And thankfully at this point in time is when they show back up, so they can just pretend like they were off hiking, and so then they're and I love what Matt and TK's dad does here, because when they're all getting loaded into the van to go back home, there's not quite enough room for June to ride in the van, and what Matt's dad does is he basically tells Matt, he's like, you're the one she came here to see. You're the one that tricked her into blah 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 blah. You can be her ride. You can ride back on the bus with her. And Matt's just like, no. I love him. I feel slightly sorry for Matt in that case, but he also kind of deserved it. There was, of course, at one point earlier when they had to Matt had to cover for Davis for whatever reason, and June's she blackmails Matt into going on a date with her. At one point. There's not too much else that happens with Matt at this point, but there is a moment because all the other Digidestined, Davis and Ken have been able to DNA Digivolve, and Kari and Yoli were able to DNA Digivolve, and this kind of implies that TK and Cody are going to be able to be DNA Digivolving partners from what we've seen, but Cody is just having a hard time connecting with TK to the point where they can Digivolve, because there has to be a connection that's formed between the two trainers, between the two Digidestined. And Cody goes and he talks to Matt, and Matt reveals that, he's giving Cody advice, and Matt kind of reveals that TK has always had a very violent reaction to darkness, which is why TK kind of has a big problem with Black or Greymon, because Devimon took Anjumon, Patamon away from him the first time that he Digivolved, and TK at this point in time is Ken has lost Wormmon at this point, but he come back. And TK is the only one out of the original group that actually knows what it feels like to watch your Digimon die in front of you. And, that would be a very painful thing. And that happened to TK when he was a very young kid. And so he always has this very violent reaction to darkness. And Matt explains that, TK was hurt by darkness and everything, and that he thinks that Cody should know about this injury. And he tells, and then he calls TK later on, and he explains that I told Cody about this. And I don't think TK's mad at Matt for anything for that, but that does result in like TK and Cody now then, a little bit later are able to DNA Digivolve, which we'll go over in, both TK and Cody's videos. But then of course we get to Christmas, and of course we have all of the younger Digidestined bring the older Digidestined's Digimon into the real world, so they all get, their Digimon that come and spend time with them for Christmas and everything. And on like Christmas Eve or whatever it is, there's Matt is gonna have a concert, and Ty and the other older Digidestined that are there, Sora, Joe, and Mimi, or well, not Joe, or not Mimi. Mimi's still off in America, but Sora and Izzy and Joe are gonna be at the concert along with Ty. And this is kind of the point where we've seen that Ty seems to. This is I mentioned in the other video that Ty at one point kind of encourages Sora to go and kind of tell Matt how she feels. And Ty, he still likes Sora, but I think that he understands that her feelings for him have shifted more into just friendship, and that her feelings for Matt have shifted more toward more affection, and more towards like love, not like friendship love, but actually being in love. And Ty's very supportive of that, and he encourages her to do that. To tell Matt how she feels. So that's Ty being a good friend, good best friend to Matt. And as I mentioned, at Matt's wedding, it would either be TK or Ty that would be the best man, and definitely at Ty's wedding, it would definitely be Matt that would be the best man, because that would be a duh. And like, it was like all of the Digidestined's wedding. It's like, well, this one would definitely be the best man here, and this one would be the maid of honor. Like, if Sora gets married, like Mimi would most definitely be her maid of honor, and vice versa. That type of a thing. And so Mimi does. Sora tells Matt how she feels to a degree, and then of course the monsters, the Digimon attack the concert, and Matt runs to protect Sora, and June kind of sees this, and that kind of breaks her kind of crush on Matt. But Matt and the others, get rid of the Digimon. They get rid of the Dirks, the control spire that's there, and then they get rid of the Digimon. Well, I think they just send them back to the digital world. And then of course we get the next morning is when of course it's revealed that there are Digimon all over the world, and Genai showed up, the younger version of Genai showed up, and he, gives them power from a Zulongmon, so their Digimon can digivolve to their highest form. So in Matt's case, that means Middle Garurumon. And all of the Digidestined end up having to go to the different spots all over the world. As I mentioned, the Digimon World Tour is, I think, just what the 2 episodes are called. And Matt gets teamed up with Ken, and they end up down in Mexico. I think they're in Mexico City. I think they end up in Mexico City, where they end up having to go into these ancient ruins that are there. I don't remember if they're Aztec or Mayan ruins off the top of my head, but they have to go in there, and they end up finding a Gatsumon, and then they find the Gatsumon's Digidestined, whose name is Rosa, and the 2 of them, they help Matt and Ken, and Rosa kind of develops a crush on Ken, which is funny. And Wormmon gets jealous, but I'll go over that in Ken's video because that's funnier. It's very funny. But like they help get these other Digimon and get them back to the digital world, of course, so they can't, so they can't cause more problems there. And then we have, they all get picked back up again, and they all get taken back to Japan. And they're all, they all get back to Japan, and they get to kind of have Christmas, and then they hear about the Dark Spore children that are all kidnapped. And, then they're, the whole chase all over the city trying to get to all of the, save Ken, but also stop these other bad Digimon. And Matt and TK don't really end up having a conversation like what I mentioned that Tai and Kari have about having to deal with, the younger kids. They have to understand that sometimes Digimon are just bad and that sometimes you do need to destroy them. Regardless of whether or not they're control spire Digimon or not, you do sometimes do need to destroy them, because if you leave them alone or if you don't destroy them, I mean, it's one thing if you can, like, make them good again. Like, Ogremon had been an enemy way back, but then he became an ally. But, that didn't happen with Devimon, that didn't happen with Myotismon, that didn't happen, that kind of happened with Ken, but Ken, there was a different reason for what happened with that, and we learn about that. Via, he was manipulated by Oikawa, which I'll go over with Ken's video. But, Matt and the others, Matt and Izzy and Joe are there when, like, TK and the rest of the younger Digidestined rush off towards Oikawa and the Darkspoor children, when, he tries to take them to the digital world, which doesn't work. They end up in a dream world. I'll go over that later. And then they end up in the digital world. But, Matt and the other older Digidestined, except for Mimi, who's in America, the others all return to the summer camp from so long ago with their families and the families of the younger Digidestined, and they go to the summer camp, and when all the darkness starts coming around, because Malamyotismon is using his power to coat the world in darkness because he's a big prick. And then of course all the Digivices shining through, and they get they open the portal again at the camp, and they're all transported through, and they have the beams of light that connect them to their Digimon that lead them to the digital world, to where this battle is going on, because all the partner Digimon showed up. And there's like hundreds of them. I don't remember if it's like hundreds or thousands of them, but there's a lot of partner Digimon and a lot of Digidestined that show up. And of course, then their, the power from their lights is, weakens Malamyotismon, and then all the Digidestined working together, giving power to Imperial Dramon Fighter Mode, are able to destroy and defeat Malamyotismon once and for all. And then, of course, going along the timeline, Matt and TK, or Matt and Tai, of course, have to deal with Diaboromon, and the Revenge of Diaboromon, that for the timeline for Digimon takes place in 2003 or so. So it's just after everything that happened with Venomyotismon, or Malamyotismon. It's like that summer after that, and they have to go into the internet, and TK and Kari are there, and they help, and they have to fight Diaboromon, but that's a distraction because all the little Kuromon are merging into Apocalypmon, or not Apocalypmon, Armageddonmon, or forming into Armageddonmon, and Matt and Tai, they have Omnimon, and they come out of the portal, and Omnimon's kind of very much too injured to be able to keep fighting, but he forms his power into the Omni Blade, or the Omni Sword, and then gives that to Imperial Dramon, which then results in Imperial Dramon Paladin Mode, which then he's able to defeat Armageddonmon. Then we enter the Digimon Tri section. For Matt. So Digimon Tri takes place in 2005. Matt and Tai and Sora and Izzy are all in high school. Joe is, I think, either just ready to graduate high school or he's just about in college. I don't remember exactly which it is. And then Mimi shows up, and she's going to be going to the same high school as them. Matt is in a new band called Knife of Day. Don't ask me where the name came from. I don't know. But, so there's a lot of, they're all in high school at this point in time. And then there's this big battle with 3 different Kuwagamon at the airport. And they all get gathered together by the government agents, Himakawa and Diego, Nishijima. The one that's undercover at at the school is their guidance counselor, who's kind of fun, and he really likes donuts. He's gonna get him and Himikawa are gonna get their own video because there's a lot to unpack with them. But what ends up happening is, so he's reunited with Gabumon, of course, and they're able to digivolve, and they fight off the the Kawagamon, and then of course all Tai and Matt end up getting very very angry at kind of each other, even to the point, well, kind of at each other, but also Matt gets very angry because there's a bunch of students that are blaming all the good Digimon, the partner Digimon, for all the trouble that the Kawagamon caused. And Matt almost tries to beat up someone, beat up a group of students for what they were saying about the Digimon. And for saying that, for these other students say that they think that all Digimon should die. And Matt gets very, very angry about this, and Tai has to like hold him back. So as I said, they have a very interesting relationship. But they end up, they meet Mako and Meikumon, and there's at one point where they have to fight a Digimon called Alphamon, and Tai and Matt have to DNA Digivolve, and they have to Digivolve to get Omnimon, and unfortunately there ends up being some problems. Tai and Matt have to keep kind of getting past the same barrier of problems that they have with each other. More just because, not necessarily with each other, but more when it comes to their perspective of things. Matt definitely thinks that they kind of do need to, and I might be slightly off on this, but I think Matt's more like they need to do like the no holds bar, like using Omnimon and the other Digimon to be able to defeat the bad Digimon, and trying to find out where this virus is coming from. Tai kind of wants to lessen the damage that the Digimon keep causing. So you kind of can't blame either one of them. Matt wants to protect their friends and protect the innocent people and protect their Digimon, and then Tai wants to, of course, he doesn't want to have people have this bad image of Digimon. So you can't, they both have their own point of view, and they both have a valid point of view, in my opinion. And that's kind of, what this is about. And then, of course, I kind of mentioned this in, I kind of actually skipped over this in Tai's video. They end up going to Diego and Maki decide that, okay, well, how about we take all of the group minus Joe, because Joe's studying, to a spa for the day. And like they have Mako there and Meikumon, and like all of the Digidestined are there with their Digimon. And as I mentioned, my grievance with, Digimon Adventure Try is they don't really do a whole lot with Davis, Yoli, Ken, and Cody, but I already went over that in the first video with Matt, or with Tai, so we'll leave that alone for now. But the rest of the Digidestined are all there. And it's kind of also a way of kind of forcing Matt and Tai to have to like talk out their problems. And that doesn't go so well. It's also a funny moment where like Meikumon and Biyomon like get lost in the spa, and all the girls are running around trying to find them, and then they end up having to go into the men's side of the spa to find Biyomon, and Meikumon and Matt and Matt and the others all kind of see the girls. I mean, like the girls are all like in their their robes and everything, but some of the guys are of course kind of naked, which is just funny. But Matt and Tai still don't talk. I did not mention this in Tai's video. Leomon shows up, and when Leomon showed up, I was just like so happy. I'm like, yay, Leomon's not dead anymore. Give it the end of the episode. Yeah. But Tai and Matt are they're still dealing with their own problems, but then there's like other things that happen, and Leomon shows up, so he all of them are happy to see Leomon, of course, and because the last time that he was around was way back in the first season, and he kind of sacrificed himself to protect Mimi and Joe against Metal Edamon, which will be in the Mimi and the Joe videos later on. But so they're all happy to see Leomon, but unfortunately problems happen, and Leomon unfortunately Meikumon has one of her episodes, unfortunately, and she unfortunately attacks Leomon, and Leomon kind of dies again, which made me very sad. I'm like, no, not again. But like, so there's unfortunately a lot of problems that happen with that. There's this big battle that like is part of like Mimi and Joe having to get past their mental blocks that they're in, and like their Digimon digivolve all the way to the fully evolved level. And throughout, as I think I mentioned this in Ty's video, throughout the course of Digimon Try, every single one of the original Digidestined, every single one of their Digimon makes it all the way to their fully evolved level. So, you know, Ty and Matt, of course, could already digivolve all the way up to the fully evolved level, which is, I can remember if it goes Ultimate and then Mega, or Mega and then Ultimate, but it's whatever the higher one is. We're already able to get up there, but the others throughout the course of this are all able to get their Digimon up to the top level. I would assume by technicality, like the level beyond this would be like will they all turn into merciful mode, Omnimon, of course, at the end, as I mentioned with Ty. But if they would able to digivolve, like kind of by this logic, it would be like Izzy and Joe would kind of be like DNA digivolving partners, and then like maybe Sora and Mimi would be like DNA digivolving partners. But that's not something that they actually go over in the series, unfortunately. But what ends up happening is, different, unfortunately, problems happen with Mekumon, and all the Digimon, as I said, unfortunately get infected with this virus, and all of the Digimon kind of talk at one point. It's like, well, what are we gonna do? We can't keep, they all find out that they're kind of all infected one way or the other, and there's going to be this forced reboot on the digital world, and that if the Digimon are inside of something, and in the digital world but inside of something, then they can be safe. And Izzy had tried to build like this kind of safe area that they can be in, which unfortunately doesn't work. And as I mentioned, all of the digital world reboots, which, as I said, watching this moment with like all the different characters' reactions as they watch their Digimon, like their Digimon are fighting, and this is when Izzy gets past his mental block and he gets, Hercules Kabuterimon. He's, he just, gathers, he's holding everyone there and everything. And that's just a very emotional moment when you watch that. But they get, all the Digimon and the Digidestined. Well, the Digidestined are watching this happen, of course, and the reboot happens. And then, all the Digidestined then have to go to the digital world to find their Digimon again, because they don't feel whole without knowing where their Digimon is, without knowing if it worked. So they go to the digital world and they find all of their Digimon trainers. They're all in their, in training modes. And, the Digimon, of course, don't remember them. And that's kind of a hard thing for them to deal with, but they start making their bonds with their Digimon again, and they digivolve, and Matt has Sunamon, and then he has Gabumon, and so it's all of them rebuilding these bonds, and Ty and Matt still kind of getting over some issues, and like they have some interesting conversation with Sora, because Sora is unfortunately having problems with Yokomon/Biomon, with not being able to connect with her, which works its way around, and they end up being fine. But I'll go over that a little bit more in Sora's video next, in the next one with Sora. But so there's a lot of that they have to deal with. And again, I forgot to mention this in the Ty video. There is a evil version of Jedi running around, because he got kind of corrupted at one point. So there's an evil version of Jedi running around and pretending to be like the Digimon Emperor version of Ken. And so they're having problems with that. And he's, attacking them with bad Digimon, and, all the Digimon, there's DNA digivolving going on with Ty and Matt. And then there's other, the other Digimon are digivolving. And then, of course, there's the whole concept of like, well, the digital world hates us because because it looks at them as an infection. And so they end up back in the real world for a while, and they end up having to camp out at the school, and so that's just a little bit of homey stuff, home stuff. Matt and TK kind of still have like they end up all calling their parents, as I mentioned with Ty and Kari. They call their mother. Matt and TK, I think that TK calls their mom. but I don't remember if they actually call their dad. More just because I'm assuming their father has his own issues right now. Like his TV station is probably under attack by Digimon again because they like to attack that place. Um, but yeah, that works its way into confession, and there's more issues that going on with Mako and Mekumon, and the Digimon still not quite remembering them, but learning, becoming closer with each other. And of course, so there's a lot of that, and then of course they end up back in the digital world and they have to fight Alphamon, and then there's I think it's Chessmon, no, it's not Chessmon, it's what's the other Digimon that they have to fight? It's not Chessmon. Well, uh there's the kind of the fully evolved form of it's Jessmon, Jesmon, and then there's Regalmon. I can never pronounce that. That's Mekumon's kind of fully evolved form before her and Ophanimon, Fallen Down merge. But so Tai, and there's that whole big battle going on, and Tai does not want to destroy Mekumon because Mako is their friend and Mekumon is their friend. And Matt is kind of the mind of, well, what does Mako want us to do? And Mako even tells them, kill her, which is just one of those moments in the show, because like she sees all these problems that Mekumon is causing with all these portals that are opening up and more Digimon going into the real world, and Mekumon is kind of the problem for everything that's going on, and that they have to restore the balance. Tai does not want to kill Mekumon, but Mako tells them to, tries to sacrifice herself so Mekumon won't die, but that doesn't work and everything. And Tai and Nishijima, unfortunately, they fall from the cliff, and everybody thinks that they're dead. And Tai, this is when Kari snaps, engulfs, and this is when the corrupted. This is when Ophanimon Fallen Down comes in, and then we have Ordinemon. In regards to that, which is just still not fun. And Matt finds Tai's goggles, and he holds on to those. And we still have the moment with, Koromon saying, I'm supposed to protect Tai. I'm supposed to protect him, and now I can't. My heart feels empty. We have that moment in there where we have, and I don't know if it's ever been explained in regards to, obviously if a human dies, then, they can't come back. Even in the digital world, if you're a human and you die in the digital world, you can't really come back. And if you're a Digimon and you die in the real world, then you can still come back, because we see this with a few other instances. I think maybe we've seen this a little bit. We see this with Kokomon in regards to Willis. We see this with Kokomon, I think. But then there's like other moments where, that's a little bit disambiguous, because, if a Digimon dies in the real world, are they able to come back because like their data is reborn? Or if they're destroyed in the real world, can they come back? But we kind of seem like with Wizardmon, looks like he might be able to come back. Admittedly, we never get a confirmation if Wizardmon actually comes back after he gives them their message, the message about Ken. But if a Digimon's in the digital world and it dies, then it can be reborn as long as the data is still okay. But so there's that problem with Mekumon there. But we don't know if it's a human dies, does that mean that their Digimon partner dies? And I mean, if the Digimon partner dies, the human doesn't die. But if the human dies, does the Digimon die? And I'm like, I really don't know, because I don't remember if that has ever been fully brought up in the series. Mekumon, unfortunately, via everything else, the whole battle and everything, and Matt and the others, and Matt's kind of the de facto leader at this point in time for the Digi Destined, in regards to trying to figure out what's going on, keep Kari safe, see what else is happening, find a way to defeat Ordinemon. find out if there's anything else that we can do. And then, of course, Tai shows back up, and, him and Matt are now fully on the same page. And, they DNA Digivolve, and they get, Omnimon comes back, and then we have, Izzy's there doing his computer thing and finding a way to release all of the memories and the data from Meikumon that will send it back to all of the other Digimon so they can all have their memories back. And so that works. But then we have Tai and Matt, and then all the others. Kari comes out of her grief stupor type thing, and she gets Gabumon back, and Gabumon fully digivolves into Magnadramon. And then when we get and then all the Digimon, all of the partner Digimon combine into Omnimon Merciful mode, and then he destroys Ordinimon and deleting Meikumon. Meikumon still kind of gets the chance to say goodbye to Mako via a vision to thank her. And there's still the corrupted version of Genai. That somehow gets resolved at another point in time, because then later on we see Genai again and he's good again. So I'm assuming that something else happened, but it's just not something that they show in the series. But they deal with that. And then of course later on, Mako is unfortunately separated from Meikumon at this point in time because Meikumon has been deleted. And then of course all the Digidestined are reunited with their Digimon. And then several months later, we have, at Christmas, we have Tai, and the others all have, they have a phone call with Mako, and Agumon, we're always going to be friends and everything. So I like that. And then we enter Digimon 2010, or the movie was Digimon 2020, which is the last evolution, which is, of course, where we have the ending of everything. Well, kind of the ending of stuff. And I will, if you watch the Tai video, I get emotionally attached to fictional characters, and I, sometimes I cry when they die, or when they get separated from each other, or when something else happens. Full disclosure, I cried at the end of Avengers Infinity War. When the snap happened, and I cried in Endgame when what happens to Natasha, and then with at the end when everybody comes back and everything, and when what happens with Tony. So I get emotionally connected to fictional characters, and sometimes I cry when they either die or they get separated. And as I pointed out in the Tai video, if that bothers you, I'm sorry. Skip ahead. I will attempt not to cry. But in this case, I possibly will. So we'll see what happens, or at the very least, I will get emotional. So we have Digimon The Last Evolution, which of course takes place about 5 years after Digimon Tri. So, Tai and Matt are both in college. And, Matt, I don't think Matt's doing his, his music thing anymore. Matt still, Matt and Tai are still very much good friends and everything. And, they haven't quite figured out what they want to do. Tai doesn't quite know what he wants to do yet. Matt doesn't quite know. There's rumors about him going around and joining the defense force, the self-defense force for Japan. And it's kind of a little more known that, Tai and the others are Digidestined at this point in time, because Matt gets recognized at one point for being a Digidestined by one of his classmates. So there's a lot of that. But, one night they're at dinner. Matt and Tai are at dinner, just, two friends having dinner, and they're talking about their futures, and they really don't know what they do. Matt wants to go to grad school. Tai doesn't know what he wants to do. And they, Joe's studying to become a doctor. Mimi has her own online company where she's, seems to be having her own version of, just selling, kind of what just one of those clothing design companies. Mimi is kind of doing that. Izzy has his own tech company. Izzy makes the Digivices that they have, because they all have kind of smartphone style Digivices. So you see that in the series. Which I just find fun. And then, Sora is working on becoming a flower ranger like her mother. TK and Kari are in high school. Kari, TK is writing a novel at this point in time. Kari still wants to become a teacher. you know, catch up on the others. I do like it, at least in the Digimon Last Evolution, we do get, Tai and, or Davis and his group. Davis is working on learning about like all kinds of noodles because he wants to own a noodle cart. I'll go over that one later with Matt, or with Davis's video. Yoli is traveling and studying, and Ken and Cody are still in school. And so, they're all going their different paths, but they're all still friends. But he also remarks that, sometimes, friends grow apart because they go in different directions. And Ty doesn't really like that idea. Matt doesn't necessarily particularly like the idea of all of them growing apart either, but, they're all still going to be friends. We've all had friends that we've grown apart from. And if you're one of the lucky people who has, always had like your best friend with you, lucky you, good for you, congratulations. If that friendship stays, so be it. If it doesn't and you grow apart, I've dealt with that. But then, of course, we are introduced to Menoa Bellucci and her kind of handler, and we learn about Eosmon, and she explains that Digimon, as long as the kid can keep growing, the Digimon potential, as that potential is still there, the Digimon can stay around until that breaks, and then Tai and Matt, of course, get the timers on their phones, that kind of the clocks that count down to when their Digimon can when their Digimon has to leave, and Matt. And they fight Eosmon online at one point, and then they end up coming back, and then she explains a bunch of stuff to them, and what ends up happening, Omnimon, when they were in the internet fighting, it was allowed, it kind of fell apart, which I think more when when the timer started, and then of course we have Menoa explains, that, as long as kids have potential and it keeps going, then the Digimon can stay, but then when it's gone, then that's broken forever and the Digimon is gone. As I mentioned, she went through this with her own Digimon. She will have her own video later on when I get to like some of the miscellaneous Digidestined after I get through the main group. And, Matt and the other, Matt and Tai both get the timers on their Digivices, and Tai is kind of just trying to spend time with Agumon. Matt's still spending time with Gabumon. Their Digimon seem to be able to be in the real world quite a bit now, because like all the others still have their Digimon with them. Like Palmon's off with Mimi helping with the company and everything, and Gomamon's kind of like cooking for Joe a lot behind the scenes, so he has food. So he's not starving as a when he comes home from school and everything. But what ends up happening is Matt becomes very suspicious of the kind of the FBI guy that's working with Menoa, and he thinks that maybe he's behind what's going on, or he knows what's going on, and he has Davis and his group, Davis, Yoli, Ken, and Cody, do kind of like a background check on Menoa. And like they find information about her and they give that back to Matt, and Matt's quite smart about this. He actually doesn't use his smartphone. He buys like a burner phone, and he gives burner phones to Ty and Izzy, and I don't remember if he gives one to Joe or not, but like he gives them burner phones, and like they're Matt or Davis and the others are only supposed to call him via like a pay phone, because Davis and the others are actually like in New York at this point in time, because they can hop around in the digital world and come out in a different portal somewhere else, which is just funny. But like they're dealing with that and everything, and Matt's being very, very smart about this, and Matt ends up following Imara, who is the FBI agent. I think that's his last name is Imara. I could be wrong on that. But he follows him, and he finds there's just a lot of problems that happen, and at one point he follows him because TK got captured and Kari got captured, and Ty's going after Kari, and Matt is going after TK, and Matt just thinks that Imara is the one kind of responsible for a lot of this stuff, for what's going on, or that he's like a hitman maybe or something. But like Mimi ends up unconscious, and then later on Joe ends up becoming unconscious, because like their Digimon vanish, of course, and then they're just left unconscious. And Matt and the other, Matt and Ty, or Matt ends up having a conversation with Imara, or that he explains with the agent that no, Menoa is actually the one behind this, and I've been trying to find a way to stop her, but I don't have the ability to. So it's, I kind of need you and Tai, you and your friends, to be able to take care of them. And, Izzy gets unconscious, and then Imara helps Matt and Tai get into the digital world, where Menoa is with all of the other Digidestined she has put into their own little worlds, as I said, where they all just like it to be kept in their memories. Because in her mind, it's like it's better to be able to stay a kid and stay in your memories with your Digimon and be happy that way than to have to grow up and watch your Digimon vanish before your eyes. I can kind of see where she's coming with that. I mean, you know, I can kind of see where she's coming from that. If you could stay in like those memories for so long, be happy that way, then, to a degree, you can understand where, yeah, that would be a nice thing. But then it's nothing ever changes. You don't move forward. You don't grow more as a person. And yeah, that goodbye hurts, and we kind of see her in her memories at one point, as I'll go over with her. We see her have to say goodbye to her Digimon. But Tai and Matt, of course, end up in the realm where she is in her crystal realm with all of the different Digidestin that she has kind of trapped there with her in their memories, and she's using them. And she just begs Tai and Matt to just leave her alone with the others, so they can just be left alone, so the others can be happy with their Digimon and she can be left alone with their heartbreak, but knowing that she saved all these other Digidestins from the heartbreak that she felt with her Digimon. And Tai and Matt try to fight her with Omnimon, but that doesn't work because Eosmon cuts Omnimon to pieces, and then uses the others to try to pin down Matt and Tai, but Tai gets, of course, hold of the whistle and blows, and then the others are fighting Menoa, fighting Eosmon. Menoa actually combines with Eosmon at one point, kind of a biomerge, which is more Digimon season 3, but she kind of biomerges with her. But then so they're all still fighting and everything, and then Matt and Tai, of course, have the moment where Agumon and Gabumon are there, and it's just like, we have to protect our friends, regardless of whether or not this is when we say goodbye. This is, how this is that we can't be with each other anymore. We have to protect our friends. We have to save them. Because watching the two of you grow has been such an adventure in and of itself. Watching all of you grow has been an adventure in and of itself. And, we have, Tai takes Agumon's hand, and Matt takes Gabumon's hand. And then, of course, we get them digivolving into Agumon, Bond of Courage, and then Gabumon, Bond of Friendship. And this is implied, I think this is supposed to be implying that even alone that these two are stronger than Omnimon, because this is like the full power of Tai's courage and their friendship combined together, and then Matt's friendship combined with, all the other stuff all together. All of those bonds pushed to the max, and they're able to defeat Eosmon, and then they're able to help pull Menoa out of her memories to help her get closure from her Digimon partner, and so she's kind of free, and then all the other Digidestined all over the world start waking up from their comas, and they have their Digimon with them again, for the ones that still had their Digimon. As I said, we see Mako and Meikumon, but Meikumon unfortunately is gone. Still at this point in time, we're never, that's never explained, if like, oh well, Meikumon did end up getting reborn at some point, and she's clean of this virus, so she's not this problem anymore. But that doesn't end up ever getting explained. But like, then we have Tai and Matt, of course, now have to say goodbye to Gabumon and Agumon, and Matt, I already went over Tai and Agumon, but we have Matt and Gabumon off, and I think it's Gabumon even asked at one point, it was like, I'd like to hear you play your harmonica again. And Matt takes out a harmonica that he just recently bought, and he starts playing it. And, so we have him and Gabumon, getting to say goodbye to each other, of course. And, yeah. Saying goodbye. And, both Digimon ask, what are we going to do tomorrow? And both trainers answer, they don't know. We'll see what tomorrow will bring. And of course, Gabumon and Agumon vanish. The following spring, we have it that, as I said, Tai has decided that he's going to become a diplomat and work between relations between the real and the digital world, and Matt is going to become an astronaut, and of course they're going forward with their dreams under the belief that they will see their Digimon partner again in the future. And, things continue. And then, of course, we jump to 2027 in the Digimon time frame, 2027. Matt has, of course, become an astronaut, and Gabumon is an astronaut with him. So at some point in this time frame, they get their Digimon back. And this implies that, that at some point, Sora and Mimi and Izzy and Joe are going to have to go through this same thing. And then even like TK and Kari and Davis and his group are going to have to go through this where they have to say goodbye to their Digimon. But then it's like, okay, well, somehow they have to get their Digimon back because we still know that they end up with their Digimon again. And I had seen a comment on, I don't remember if this was on Tumblr or what, but I had seen a comment that someone had made, or a post that someone had made, that I really liked, and it actually kind of made me feel a little bit better that I wasn't like, I'm not the only one that's worried about this, am I? And as we see, each and every one of the other Digidestined now has their own kids. And the thought that the person had in the post was, it's it's like you're an adult now, but and you don't have your Digimon anymore, but if when you have kids of your own, then there's this new potential there, and that your life now has all of this new potential to do what you can do with your kid. And that like, I think the quote was like, it was like Tai and his wife were sitting down, or in this case, like Matt marries Sora, as I said, Matt becomes an astronaut and they land on Mars, even though they were only supposed to go to the moon, as the quote goes. But Matt married Sora, and as I said, Sora's maid of honor was probably Mimi, but then like Matt's best man was either going to be TK or Tai. Either one I'm perfectly fine with, and I'm pretty sure that both TK and Tai would have been perfectly fine with whichever one Matt picked. But we have that, and all the Digidestined have their own kids. Matt and Sora have a son and a daughter. The daughter has Matt's hair color and has a Yokomon, and the daughter has, and the son has Sora's hair color and has a Sunomon. So it's it's a little bit of a flip there with that. And as a kid, when I'm watching the scene at the end of the series, I'm like, I don't think I quite caught that. That was like, oh, Matt and Sora got married. I don't think I ever quite caught that as a kid. But like later on, I got it. But the post that someone made was that, it's like. I think they'd use Tai as an example. Like Tai and his wife were sitting down, and the wife says, "Oh, I'm pregnant," and that like Tai just has like this moment of, "Oh my," and like out from under the chair or something like that pops Agumon like, "Hey Tai, long time no see. Is there food?" I was like, it's like I had that same image in my head with this about like with when like Sora tells Matt that she's pregnant. And that like Biyomon and Gabumon pop up out of nowhere, and it's like, okay, we get our Digimon back. I just always, I like that someone came up with that idea, and I very much appreciate it. And I just like that idea a lot. And that like, as each of the Digidestined found out that they were going to be parents, or like maybe when they started trying to become parents to a degree, that's when their Digimon showed back up again, because now there's this new potential there, and then now they can stay for a while, which I like quite a bit. And then of course now we're going to move on to the different relationships. TK and Matt's family. Okay, well, Matt, but TK's family also is implied with this. Their father's name is Hiroki Ishida is their father. Matt has their father's last name, and then Nancy Nakashi is their mother. TK has their mother's last name. They have their grandma Kinu, and I'm assuming that's their grandmother on their father's side, because then when Tai and TK go to New York or go to when they go to Paris, they interact with Michael Takashi, uh, Takayashi, whatever, who seems to be Nancy's father. They interact with him. So Nancy is very kind and friendly. She is a very loving mother to TK. That's very reflected in that. But with Matt, she's more reserved and stubborn as a result. Matt's more stubborn with her as a result of not growing up around her so much, and she's not as familiar with how to be a mom to Matt. That does seem to get better, though, I do think. We don't get too much other interaction with them, but Nancy and their father seem to be much more involved with the kids because they help, because like their mother is a reporter. She's a reporter or a journalist type thing, and she like did a whole lot of like information gathering for like all the kids that were like the dork sport kids. She like did a whole lot of, like information gathering to like tell the kids what they could or what she could about the ones that were taken by Oikawa. And like the parents seem to be very supportive. At one point, Nancy and Hiroki, Hiroika, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I'm wrong, I apologize. They were married for a while. Matt seemed to be about 7-8 range or so when they got a divorce, and TK was about 4-ish, 3 going on to 4 range when they got the divorce. And Matt went with their dad, TK went with their mom. Probably didn't see each other that much, but maybe every now and then they still saw each other. Matt and his mom had little contact. Was actually very, very cold to his mother when she greets him after the battle with Venom Myotismon. But that seems to get a little bit better. And then, of course, we have their father, who is, of course, their father, who runs the TV station and goes through so much crap that he doesn't deserve to go through. He gathers information. He helps them. He even helped Izzy at one point, trying to get information from the TV station back when they were dealing with Myotismon back in the first season. And it's just it's funny, and like Matt even makes like a running joke in the series about like between him and his dad, it's like 2 single guys being roommates. And he makes a comment of like that he looks more at Hiroikai. He looks at their father more as like a reverse roles in the family, where Matt sometimes acts more like the parent than their dad does. But so we have he's very the parents, both of their parents are very involved in this case. And of course, we had their grandfather that TK and TK and Tai interacted with in Paris. Apparently, and like the joke that the grandpa gives is like why the grandma's not there, and of course the grandpa rides a motorcycle, so the grandpa's already kind of cool in my book. But he makes the comment, like the grandpa made the comment of like when TK asked how grandma is, he's like, oh, she's re-roofing their home on Christmas, and I'm like, okay. And of course there's also they end up at the Palace of Versailles, and because they have to help Katrin and her Digimon, of course, during that time frame. And what ends up happening is like TK makes a comment of like, well, maybe they're doing something there, maybe they're doing something, and like I think the grandfather made the same comment about like, well, these kids are supposed to be up, but ask your grandmother, she knows, she's the one they call for repairs. I'm like, I am confused and also intrigued by this family. And of course, we have we have their grandmother that we saw back in Digimon. Our war game thing that they had, where they had to deal with Gabumon. Of course, we see that grandmother, who I'm assuming is like the grandmother on their father's side. And then of course we have the future family of Matt, of course, marries Sora, and then they have their daughter and their son. TK and Matt, the parents are divorced, but Matt always takes a very close extra responsibility of TK's well-being and everything, and is very overprotective of him, as I mentioned. By the time season 2 rolls around, Matt's much more comfortable with TK being on his own, and with TK being very self-sufficient and everything. But Matt's, of course, still his older brother, and he's still going to be protective of him. Matt and Tai's relationship is very interesting. because it's like, they kind of start out, they are best friends. They're very, very much best friends. And that, that's implied for the fact that, they're DNA digivolving partners and everything. I mean, like, we've never 100% been given the exact criteria for how, it's like, you have to have this bond with a Digimon, and this bond with you and your Digimon, and then this Digimon bond between you and this other person to be able to do the DNA digivolving. Because we see that more in season 2 with Davis and his group, since all 6 of them are able to DNA digivolve. But Tai and Matt can DNA digivolve, of course, but we don't know if the situation ever called for it, if like maybe Sora and Mimi, like if Biyomon and Palmon could ever DNA digivolve, or whatever their highest forms would be able to digivolve, or like with Joe and Izzy, or would Izzy's relationship for that type of a thing be closer to Tai, and then like Tai and Izzy would be able to DNA digivolve like their Digimon. But we don't 100% know about that. That's not really something that they've gone into too much in the series. But what ends up happening is, of course, Tai and Matt have, very good relationships at times, and then very rocky relationships. Throughout the Digimon Adventure Try, we see them get, they have issues that they have to go through, of course, which is not fun to watch. But they get over their issues with each other, and they have their different points of view. And it's kind of implied, as I said, Tai encouraged Sora to tell Matt how she feels. And then, of course, Tai also encourages Matt to tell Sora about his feelings for her. And this is more kind of implied from Matt's side of things in regards to Tai. There does seem to be, and this is more something that comes up a little bit with like Adventure Tribe. It is more in the last evolution, the last Digivolution, where where it kind of seems like Matt seems to have a bit of a crush on Tai. And like Tai is either completely oblivious to this, or he just doesn't have like that type of feelings for Matt. And of course, Matt ends up with Sora. We know this, but Matt seemed to have a bit of a crush on Tai at one point. More like probably like end of high school into college type stuff. Then we have Matt and Sora, of course. Matt sometimes throughout the course of the series they do become close friends, and then of course in the second season is when that relationship kind of changed. She starts developing feelings for him, and he starts developing feelings for her, and they end up dating afterwards. And Tai is very encouraging of this, and he's Matt's Tai's okay with this. He's I think Matt's still a little bit cautious at times, but at one point we have like a moment where like there's like the Digimon Gabumon Strikes Back in his revenge one. We have it where like all the Kuromon are trying to find Tai and Matt, and they have these pictures, and like one of the pictures is like Matt and Sora out on a date. And that's just funny. Dating a close friend, and of course we know that they end up getting married, of course, and they have a son and a daughter. That's where that comes from. And then of course Matt and Izzy. He relies on Izzy a lot and values his ability to process facts and everything and information. What was the other thing? It was like, and then in Digimon Adventures, Izzy seemed to be the only member of the team besides Sora who Matt did not at one point act bothered by. Because at one point, Matt has problems with Tai. At some point, him and TK have arguments. Him and Joe end up having an argument. Him and Mimi end up having an argument. Izzy and Matt never really seem to have an argument, and like Matt and Sora never really end up seeming to have an argument. And then we have Mimi. In the beginning he's more annoyed by Mimi's antics, which as much as she's complaining about everything that's going on, but he eventually accepts her. And he's easily frustrated by Mimi or her lack of common sense when it comes to different things, which is just funny. And just, like all these other things that ends up happening. He's, but he's also protective of Mimi, and, he, different, whole bunch of stuff, like at the beginning of season 2, when it's all the Digidestined kind of end up talking. At some point, he explains that, like, he had called Mimi and told her about, this might just have been in the English dub, but, like, he had called Mimi and, like, told her about what was happening with, like, the Digimon Emperor, and that she, and she said that she was concerned about Palmon and everything and the others. Matt and Joe initially seem, not the best with each other, but that gets better, of course, as time goes by. And Joe and Matt have to work together to pull Sora out of her depression, and of course, Matt's one of the ones that helps pull Sora out of her depression. And then, whenever Tai is not around when it comes to Kari, Matt tries to take a little bit more of that responsibility for Kari. As I said, Tai left Kari with Matt to protect her when he had to go off to go and try to find go to find Gabumon, and Matt is still very easily distressed when, like, Kari is taken, when she willingly gives herself up to protect the others. Matt and Davis, Davis is kind of Davis is supposed to be a little bit of the combination between, like, Matt and Tai, because he has courage and he has friendship. But at one point when Matt and Davis end up interacting, Davis, like, is slightly disrespectful of his sister, and this is, I think, kind of before Matt has realized how obsessive June is with him, and he kind of chastises Davis for the fact of, you shouldn't talk about your sister like that, and Davis just kind of gives him this look and basically has the attitude of, like, she's my sister, I know more about her than you do. If I think she's horrible, then I'm allowed to say it, type of a thing. And Matt is still kind of afraid of June, which is just funny. Matt Lee, looks at her as an essential member of the team. She does sound mixing for their band, for the Teenage Wolves and everything. And apparently her sister, one of Yolee's older sisters, is I don't remember if she has one older sister or two, but she at least has one older sister. One of her older sisters is in Matt's class, so there's that connection. Cody, essential member of the team. He thinks thinks Cody kind of takes a little bit too much onto himself at times. And Matt, of course, it helps explain to Cody why TK is having a problem when it comes to maybe them being able to DNA Digivolve, why TK has all of those problems with Devimon and with the darkness and everything, the forces of darkness, why he has such contempt for them. And then we have Ken. Matt, just like a bunch of the other older Digidestined, when Ken was the Digimon Emperor, he was, of course, an enemy. But Matt later on, Matt and Ken have to travel to Mexico City, where they help Rosa to destroy the Control Spire and help Rosa and her Digimon with Gatomon and everything. And so he's very much everyone's relationship with Ken changes quite a bit between when he was a Digimon Emperor, he was the enemy, and then ends up still helping Ken in regards to fighting him with kindness and everything, and helping him, and accepting him back into the fold as a member of the Digidestined, that he is a Digidestined, that he is now part of the younger group, and that he is he's a very valuable member of the team, but he's also just someone that needs a friend. And of course, Matt's crest is friendship, and sometimes that's what Ken needed, and Matt was quite good with that, and I liked that. So yeah, Matt has we're about at the end of the video. It's a little bit shorter than the Tai video, thankfully, and I didn't get emotionally I didn't do that, so that was good. The next video will be Sora, and that will be, I don't know, we'll see when I get to that one. But so Matt's kind of one of the ways I think that they were trying to show of someone taking on a lot of responsibility, but also trying to figure out, like, their place. Like, all the Digidestined are trying to find their place. you know, what, do you want to be here? Would you want to be this? Matt is also, it was like, he always looked at it when he was younger. He was like, his job was to protect TK. And then, that shifted into wanting to protect all of their friends. And of course, that shifted again into, protecting the world and, doing what he could there. But then, he still loved music and everything. That was always part of Matt's, um, part of Matt's character with his harmonica way back, even in the original series of Digimon, he always had his harmonica. And then, of course, he's, in the band and everything, the Teenage Wolves. And then later on, what was it, like Knife of Day and whatever the other ones were that were there. All of his other bands that he's been a part of. But, there's still that there of, Matt's kind of one of the ones that they show depression through as well, and having to deal with, getting past mental barriers. And Sora kind of has that too in regards to her depression, which I'll talk about in the next video, of course, with Sora. But there's other times when it comes to, other Digidestin that, Matt's not the easiest one when it comes to him, just Matt's not the best when it comes to expressing his emotion right away. But friendship is also something, of course, that means quite a lot to him. And if you're someone that has been able to get past his walls and get to that point with him becoming what he considers an actual friend, then Matt will do whatever he can to protect you, regardless of, oh, this is going to cause a lot of problems. I don't care. You're my friend. I'm going to go through hell and back to be able to protect you. But a lot of the Digidestins are that way too. So that's what we have for Matt. Next up will be Sora. I hope you enjoyed the video. I thank you for watching, and I hope that you have a nice rest of your day. Bye. You're so busy looking forward that you never take time to look back. We've lost some good friends here, Ty, and it's nice to remember them once in a while.